let me close out some windows here. All right, and we are recording. All right, so we need to get started. It's now 4:16. Yes, I guess a lot of people are taking an extended holiday. That's okay. I mean, we were just talking before we started here. Well, let me go back. Look, this has been a difficult semester, right? For everyone, it's been a very difficult year. It's challenging enough to try and get a college degree, to do well in all of your courses. You know, it requires a lot of emotional fortitude, you know, resiliency. To be able to do it during a pandemic, you know, it really sort of takes an exceptional effort, right? So, you know, this isn't easy, right? So, I mean, you should be all proud of yourselves for, you know, everything that you've accomplished so far, just getting through the semester. You know, it's not easy. No one foresaw these kinds of challenges. So you are having a very unique college experience. Hopefully it comes to an end soon, but certainly this has been a pretty significant impact on people's lives and just, you know, their ability to sort of, you know, operate in this environment and to be effective. So you should be proud, you know, for what you've accomplished so far. This is not easy. All right, so that out of the way. Yeah, so maybe some people are taking an extended break, you know, that's okay. We all need to recharge. The semester's coming to an end. This is the second to last lecture we have. One more after this, and that's it. So the semester's coming to an end. We'll all get to take a needed break. And then I think we'll have one more semester maybe under these sort of pandemic conditions. We'll see. All right, so for this week, we are all the way up to chapter 15. We only have one more chapter to go, which we'll cover next week on next Tuesday. We're going to talk about communication this week, but before we get to that, there's going to be a few announcements. So first off, when we talked about this last week, the self-reflection paper will be due on December 13th. So you got to submit it by the end of the day on December 13th. You'll be able to do that right on Blackboard. In the Blackboard section where you submit your paper, there's an example paper that's given. So that should give you a pretty clear idea on what's expected. That's not, you know, by no means a perfect paper. You don't want to exactly copy it, but it gives you an idea of one way to approach the paper. But also, it shows you exactly what the APA structure should be, right? And so we need an abstract. It needs to be formatted the right way. You need the headings to be formatted in a particular way. And so if you just follow the formatting in that example paper, then you'll meet the APA guidelines. The only thing that paper doesn't have is citations. And of course, you can submit your paper without any citations. You don't need to cite the textbook when you talk about the self-reflection assessments. But if you do want to cite a work, you need to use the APA citation format. And basically what you're going to be writing about in the paper is you're just going to be, it's subjective. You're going to express your own ideas about the self-assessments that you took. So you want to talk about what you learned about yourself, some of the strengths that you learned about yourself, the weaknesses, whether this is a surprise to you, whether maybe you disagree with it. And you also want to talk about maybe how this is going to impact you in the future, right? So will these strengths and weaknesses impact your performance in the workplace in the future? So that's the basic idea. So does anyone have any questions about the self-reflection paper? Okay, excellent. Next up, the final exam. We will have one more exam in this class. This exam is scheduled for Thursday, December 17th at 3:30. You will have an hour and 15 minutes to complete the exam. The format almost certainly will be similar to the format we used on the midterm. So it should look pretty similar to the midterm. I haven't made the actual final yet, so that may change. I'm not sure. I don't think so. I don't think it will change. So you should expect that would be what the format is going to look like. And again, the content that we're going to cover is only what I've talked about in the lectures, right? So just like on the midterm, I'm not going to test you on anything that might be in the textbook that I didn't cover in the actual lecture. Okay, so you were, 3:30, to 5:30. So I think the question is, will you have up until 5:30 to complete the exam rather than 4:45? And so given the format of the exam, you'll have an hour and 15 minutes, which will be plenty of time. So you won't have until 5:30 to do this kind of exam that I'm giving you. Yeah, so you'll have an hour and 15 minutes to complete it. It'll start at 3:30. Yeah, you're welcome. So again, the format should be similar to the midterm, right? Certainly, without question, this won't change. I will only test you on content I covered in the lectures. If something appeared in the textbook that I didn't cover in a lecture, it won't appear on the final. Now, this final, we're covering a lot more chapters than we did on the midterm. So we're going to be covering chapters 8 through 16. So just to sort of refresh your memory on all of the ground that we've covered, I've highlighted here what chapters you are going to be tested on. And I think an effective approach to studying for the exam will be to focus on, what I highlight in my lectures. And what I highlight in my lectures really could be found in the summaries that I give for each of the chapters. And this is really sort of highlights the main ideas from each of the chapters, right? So what we covered so far is, so I listed it here in this slide. So we covered organizational culture, structure, and design, right? Culture, we remember, these are the shared assumptions about how work gets done. and it must align with the company's strategy. Human resource management, the idea here is that humans are the most valued, employees are the most valued resource that a company has, right? Despite all of the exponential growth in technology, and technology is certainly important, really the most important resource that a company has is its employees, is the human beings in that company rather than the machinery. And we talked about how to select the right employees and how to develop those employees. The innovation chapter, organizational change and innovation. Remember, I introduced that concept of bricolage, which is an approach to being creative. I covered some innovation types. We covered organizational change and resistance that you will encounter when you try and change an organization. Individual differences. We talked about the big 5 personality types, not personality types, rather the components of personality. I had mentioned actually that there aren't really personality types, right? That there's a gradation along these 5 dimensions that people vary on. So we talked about the big 5. So people are going to differ along the big 5 components of personality. We talked about emotional intelligence, core self-evaluation. These are traits that people have that sort of define who they are. And these traits are important because it determines their attitudes, and their attitudes determine their behavior. The behaviors that we are particularly concerned about are things like performance, right? And so that's sort of the big idea from that chapter. Then we covered motivation, right? And motivation, I basically said the idea here is you want to generate positive psychological, cognitive, physical, behavioral experiences to get people to do the things you want them to do, right? And that's sort of the big idea with motivation. Then we talked about groups and teams. We talked about what a team is, Tuckman's stages of team development. We talked about how to properly build teams and how to manage conflict. Last week, we covered leadership. This week, we're going to cover communication, and next week, we're going to cover control systems. I will have a review document that highlights all of the most important ideas from each of these chapters, which I think will make studying for the exam a lot easier. It will also emphasize, I think, the main ideas that you really want to take away from each of these chapters that are sort of important to know moving forward beyond this course. I mean, everyone did, for the most part, everyone did really well in this class on my midterm, so I'm not really that concerned about how well you're going to do on the final. My Friday class, if you listen to my Friday class, they didn't do, as well, but they did okay. But hopefully that this will sort of help the process. So any questions on taking the final? Okay, good. Moving right along. So another announcement. The university likes it when students complete the course evaluation, where you get to evaluate what you thought about the course, what you thought about the professor. In order to help facilitate that process, I thought we might take a few minutes to give you an opportunity to actually fill out the evaluation now. Now, look, it's not required. You don't have to take the next few minutes to evaluate it, but now's an opportunity to do that. So I have the link here, but what I will also do is I will copy the link. Oh, wait, hold on. I will also can I copy this? Do I gotta? Hopefully, oh no, I got to. All right, hold on. Another way you can access the evaluations is, because I don't think that you're going to be able to click on this link. I want to put I don't know, you might be able to click on the link. I want to put the link also in the chat, but also there's a QR code here. So if you want to use your phone, You can access the actual course evaluations on your cell phone, but let me just real quick. Let me get the link so I can put it in the chat, and that might make it a little bit easier. Here we go, boom. So we'll take, oh, wait, hold on. Wait, I wanna. There we go. All right, so we'll just take a couple of minutes. You can use that time to actually, fill out the evaluation if you want. Again, it's not required, but I don't know, it's good to do. So let's take a couple of minute break while you all work on that, and we'll come back in just like a couple of minutes. right, so we'll take like maybe like another minute. All right, hopefully you all were able to do that, or at least some of you. Is anyone still finishing up? Are we good to go? All right, cool. I will take that as we are good to go. All right, so thank you all for taking the time to do that. Actually, I think this is something that the students make use of, when they consider what classes to take. So, providing that information, accurate information, I think is pretty helpful. I know I used Rate My Professor back in the day when I was taking courses. So I think it's important, right, to understand how a course is run, what the professor's like, all of that. All right, so moving on. Yeah, definitely. I think that students definitely still use it. I think it's definitely useful. Something certainly to consider when you're thinking about what courses to take. All right, so last week we covered leadership. And just a quick summary. So leadership, right, is your ability to influence employees to pursue organizational goals, and that influence is voluntary, right? You are influencing to voluntarily pursue organizational goals rather than forcing them to do that. And your effectiveness and your ability to lead depends on two aspects. It depends on your leadership traits and your leadership behaviors. And the traits that we talked about there are some traits that improve your ability to lead. These are, and we talked about the big five components of personality, right? And so there are 4 of them that have a positive impact on your ability to lead. That's openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, and emotional stability. The more you score higher on each of these dimensions, the better natural leadership abilities you will have. Additionally, other traits that people have that have a positive effect on leadership is intelligence, emotional intelligence, and positive affect. Some of the negative traits that people possess that will have a negative impact on your ability to lead are what's known as the dark triad. That's narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathic behavior. And so these kinds of traits will not serve you well in a leadership role. They will not lead to effective leadership. Now, traits, we know, these are persistent features that characterize who a person is. They're very difficult to change. Often you can't change them at all. They'll persist throughout a person's entire lifetime. So there are certain aspects of people that naturally enable them to be a good leader, but traits play a smaller role on your ability to lead than behaviors do. And behaviors can be learned. So your behaviors are going to have a much bigger impact on how effective you are as a leader rather than these traits, which means leadership is something that can be learned. And so the way I presented leadership behaviors is similar to the way I presented the motivation chapter. There are lots of different ideas and theories about motivation, and sort of to make sense of them all, I put them in these different buckets. And so I did the same here for leadership. There are lots and lots of different leadership theories about kinds of leadership behaviors. But the way to, I think the best way to think about leadership behaviors is that they come in two types. Leadership behaviors that focus on tasks and leadership behaviors that focus on relationships. And I introduced 4 of them, 4 leadership behavior types that focus on relationships. And these are ways in which you can improve the effectiveness in your ability to lead. And so that was leadership. Any questions on leadership? Okay, hopefully you're all now properly prepared to effectively lead in the future. What we're going to cover today is communications. Now, what I talk about today in this lecture will be different than what was covered in the textbook. So I think you might find this a little bit more useful. I will introduce a communication approach that you can use in your business communication, so it will be very practical. Communication, though, is formally defined as the transfer of information and understanding from one person to another. So you're transmitting information from a sender to a receiver. And for the sender, for the communication sender, the goal is to be both efficient and effective. And efficient communication is when you can transmit your message accurately in the least amount of time. You don't want to ramble on and on and on forever, right? You want to get your message across as quickly as possible. That's an efficient communication. But you don't want to do that at the expense of effectiveness. And effective communication is when the intended message is accurately understood by the other person, right? By the communication receiver. And so that's the goal. Now, I had mentioned when we talked about writing the paper for this course, that's an opportunity to improve on communication skills, and that communication skills are very, very, very important. It's one of the most important skills that you can develop. And a lot of studies have recognized this. 80% of employers believe that oral and written communication skills are very, very important. 75% of students buy into that as well. So I think a lot of you, most of you recognize the importance that communication skills are. The problem, though, is that 60% of students reported that they are effective, that they do have a high degree of skill in oral and written communications. So more than a majority. But that was endorsed by only 20% of employers, right? So there's this disconnect between what sort of employees think of their communication skills and what employers think of their communication skills. And so employers think largely that this is something that employees need to work on and that they need to improve. So hopefully this is a technique that will help you in that process. But again, the goal as a sender of a message is that it's received in an efficient and effective manner. For the communication receiver, obviously, you want to understand the message, but depending on the context, it's also an opportunity to build on the relationship with the person who is sending you that message. And this is something we talked about with teams, right? When in order to help effectively build a team, what you want to do is you want to make the person feel like an equal. The members, every member of that team to feel like an equal. One way to do that is to enable every person an equal opportunity to voice their opinions on whatever project it is that you're working on. And you want to convey to that person that they have equal standing when they're given their opinions, right? And one way you can do that is through this process of active listening. And so we talked a little bit about that a couple of weeks ago. Active listening is a way to sort of acknowledge the value of the message that the communicator is sending you. And this is a very effective way of improving the relationship you have with that person that you're talking with. And in fact, it's an important component of this process called motivational interviewing, which is a therapeutic process that people use in a sort of therapeutic setting with people that are suffering from mental illness, like anxiety, things like this. And so this video is sort of a comical take on active listening, but I think it really clearly demonstrates what it is. So we'll just play this.
First, there was PlayStation, aka PS1. Then there's PS2, PS3, and now PS4. And that makes sense. You'd think after Xbox, there'd be Xbox 2. But no. Next came Xbox 360. And now, after 360, comes Xbox One. Why one? Maybe that's how many seconds of thought they put into naming it.
Can you get the butter, please?
You know, however, with the Xbox One, I can control my entire entertainment system using voice commands. Up until now, I've had to use Leonard.
Then get the other one. Pass the butter.
Hang on. I don't feel like you're taking this dilemma seriously.
Fine, Sheldon. You have my undivided attention.
Okay, now, the PS4 is more angular and sleek looking.
No way!
It's true, but the larger size of the Xbox One may keep it from overheating.
You wouldn't want your gaming system to overheat?
No, well, you absolutely would not. And furthermore, the Xbox One now comes with a Kinect included.
Included?
Yes! Not sold separately. Although the PS4 uses cool new GDDR5 RAM, while the Xbox One is still using the conventional DDR3 memory.
Why would they still be using DDR3? Are they nuts?
See, that's what I thought. But then they go and throw in an ES RAM buffer.
Oh, wait a second. Who's they?
Xbox.
You're kidding!
No, I am not. And this ES RAM buffer should totally bridge the 100 gigabit per second bandwidth gap between the two RAM types.
This is a nightmare. How will you ever make a decision?
See, I don't know. What should I do?
Please pass the butter!
So I hope you found that funny. I'm a huge fan of The Big Bang Theory. I'm very excited, by the way, that all of the episodes, all 12 seasons, are now available on HBO Max. Because I used to have them actually recorded, and someone deleted all my recorded episodes, and I never got to watch all the seasons. Anyways,
you should give them an F.
Wait, you say it again?
You should give that person an F that deleted your recording.
Yes. Unfortunately, though, it wasn't a student. I would love to give that person an F, but you know who it was? It was my mom. I gave my mom access to this service that I subscribed to, in an effort to be a good son, save my mom a little money, and she gets access to all of these shows without having to pay a subscription fee, and she's in there deleting stuff. I said, Mom, what are you doing? Why are you deleting all my shows? And she says, you're not watching it. I'm like, how do you even know? this is my mom. Yes. I didn't give her an F, but I had to cut her off. I had to take the remote from her. I said, "Mom, you can't access my service no more." She was deleting my shows. So anyways, yes, so that was my mom that actually deleted all of my episodes. It was very traumatic for me, but I'm glad that HBO Max came along and now makes the shows available. So so our relationship is now mended. Yes. Exactly. Exactly right. It always is. Anyway, so, all right. So the communication process. So the communication process right here is illustrated in this graphic, right, where we have a sender sending a message to a receiver, and then the sender gets feedback from the receiver after that message is sent. And one of the challenges in the communication process is that noise is introduced into the process, and so that could, affect the ability for the receiver to accurately receive that message, right? And so the textbook, if you read the chapter, it goes through lots of the ways in which noise is sort of introduced into the communication process, which you can read about. But what I like about this graphic is that it introduces structure to an idea, right? And so this graphic is presenting the communication process to you, and it does it by breaking the communication process down into multiple components. And that is a way of building structure. And structure helps you develop and communicate ideas. And the process for developing structure on any ideas is to take your big idea and divide it up into its component parts. And the reason why you want to do that is because it simplifies the idea. You can look at each of the components individually. So it will enable you to better understand each of the components, and it will also enable you to better understand the relationships between each of the components. And so structure should be created for all the ideas that you want to communicate. And so that's what I'm going to introduce to you today in today's lecture. And the previous example, the previous graphic is an example of this, right? So the communication process is broken down into these different parts: sender, receiver, message, noise, feedback. And by doing that, it gives you the opportunity to really better understand the whole process and find out where things can go wrong and the like. And so I'm going to introduce a system for bringing structure to your ideas so that you can communicate them more effectively. Now, MECE is a kind of structure, and this is one approach that you can use in creating structure. And MECE is an acronym that stands for mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. And the idea is that the parts that you break your idea up into have to be both mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. And what that means, and so for mutually exclusive, all that means is that all your items are data points that belong to one part cannot belong to another part. That's what will make the parts mutually exclusive. In other words, the parts do not overlap. And an example of this would be age groups, right? And so if you had data on, you were doing a presentation that analyzed a group of people. And if you broke those people down into age groups, those age groups would be mutually exclusive because a person cannot belong to more than one age group, right? You're one age and one age only. A bad example would be hobbies. If you broke your data set down into different hobbies, that wouldn't be mutually exclusive because a person can have more than one hobby, so they can belong to more than one group. The idea of collectively exhaustive just means that all the parts total the larger thing, right? So you have this main idea that you want to convey, and when you break it down into parts, all of the parts have to equal that total sum. You can't leave parts out. And so an example of leaving parts out is if you keep them with this age example category, if your top category, age category was, like, say, 40 to 50-year-olds, right? That wouldn't be collectively exhaustive, because you would be leaving out all the people who were older than 50 years old, right? And so if you're breaking people down into age groups, you might want to add a final category of 50 and over. This will all make sense. This is a very simple idea. It'll all make sense when I give you an actual example. Now, the pyramid approach is the approach that I'm going to teach you. And it uses MECE components and a pyramid structure as a way to effectively develop and communicate ideas. And so basically what you want to do is you have an idea that you want to present, right? It's some sort of analysis that you did, a report that you have to produce, a presentation that you have to give. And this is what I'm talking about is a business setting. So you want to communicate this presentation in a business setting. This is one approach to use. And so whatever that idea is, you want to divide that idea into components that meet this sort of MECE criteria, right? And then you want to structure those components into a pyramidal structure. And all that means is that you're going to, and I'll show you, the graphic will make this very, very clear. It's very, very simple. So basically what you want to do is whatever idea you want to break it down into what the goal is of whatever your presentation or idea is, the arguments that you're going to make to sort of substantiate that goal or recommendation, and then the evidence that supports each of your arguments. And you're going to structure that in a pyramid, and this sort of, I think, sort of illustrates this point. And when you're using the pyramid approach, basically what you want to do is whatever your main recommendation is, whatever like the overall goal or idea that you want to convey in your report, right? The final sort of result that you landed on after your analysis. You want to start with that first, rather than start with all of the data, right? Go into all of the data and then build arguments based on the data. And then finally in the end of the presentation with this big reveal, give your sort of main recommendation. That's typically what people often do. And what I'm suggesting is a more effective way of communicating is to flip that idea. So you want to start with your main recommendation. You want to give your supporting arguments for that main recommendation. And then for each of them arguments, give the evidence that makes those arguments valid. And then when you break those ideas up, your idea up into each of those parts, you want to make sure each level, each of your supporting arguments meets this MECE criteria, right? So they want all of your three arguments in this example, you want them to be mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. So you don't want each of these arguments to overlap, and you want all those arguments to be all the arguments you need to make to support that main idea. And then the same is true for each of the supporting data. And then now to make this clear, I'm going to go through an example, but the reason why I want to sort of introduce this idea to you is that this is, it's an idea that's pretty common within communications as one way of sort of delivering and trying to understand big ideas. But it's the method that's taught at McKinsey. Does anyone know who McKinsey is? Does that ring a bell for anyone? Does anyone know who? I think I mentioned them maybe the first week. So McKinsey, for those of you, and it's not surprising that maybe not everyone knows or no one knows who they are, but they're a consulting firm. They're one of the leading consulting firms, and probably one of the most popular sort of career paths for people who get an MBA is to become consultants. And one of the largest firms that recruits most of the consultants is this company, McKinsey & Company. And they consult, it's a management consulting company, and they consult with all of the top firms in the world, right? So the Fortune 100 companies. And when they consult with them, they consult on big ideas, and they present their ideas at the executive level, right? So all of their ideas that they present are presented sort of at the highest levels. And what they teach all of their consultants is this process for delivering presentations, for communicating ideas, and it's an approach that they should adopt and use in all of their communications, right? And so I think it's a very effective way of communicating within business. And so it's good when you're doing a presentation, it's good when you're writing a report, and it's good when you're just having a conversation, right? And so if your project leader or a senior executive asks you, so what's the deal with this report? The way you want to respond is in this way, right? And sort of the main idea here is that you want to cut through the chase, right? You want to begin your presentation with the result, with whatever your main recommendation is going to be, right? Then you give your 3 supporting arguments, and then you provide the evidence for each of them. And so what a lot of people though do is they reverse that process, right? They wait for, they sort of prime the audience with all of this data, with all of this evidence to build an initial sort of platform that they can place their arguments on top of. And then, at the very end, reveal sort of their final sort of conclusion, what their main recommendation is going to be. And what they say, what this approach suggests is that you should reverse that process. That's the basic idea. So I'm going to run through an example of using this approach. And so McKinsey teaches this. Barbara Minto is a McKinsey consultant. She's not with them anymore. This is something that she used to teach at McKinsey. And so she did a lot of the work in developing this particular idea. She wrote a book. And so if this is something you want to know more about, you can purchase the book and learn a lot of the details. But this is the main idea. And this is enough for you to really sort of make use of it. And so I'll just run through an example of how you would make use of this approach. Now, this is an election season, so we have talked a little bit about politics in this class. I talked about it in my other class as well. And I had mentioned, I think on a couple of occasions, that I am not a fan of democracy. But I was reluctant to give sort of my reasons why. I didn't want to turn this into a political science class. But if I were to sort of explain myself, right, and give you that reason, I'm going to use that sort of as an example to illustrate how you would use this pyramidal approach to conveying that idea. And we can maybe pretend, that I'm working for Biden, right, and I am one of his senior advisors, and he asked me, Jeff, what is it that we should do? And I'm going to come back to him with the presentation, right? And so an executive says, look, we have a problem. We want to maybe enter a new market. What do you think? What should we do? Should we introduce a new product? Should we enter a new market? Those kinds of questions, you're going to do some kind of analysis, develop some kind of conclusion that will have an answer to that question, right? What should we do? Should we enter the market? Should we start a new product line? What should we do in this country to fix this country? And whatever that idea is that you come up with, you want to deliver that idea using this method. And so here is an example of that with the idea of democracy is not a good idea. So I would start with the claim, right? And so at the top of the pyramid, remember, is your sort of main recommendation. And so my main recommendation is that democracy should be replaced with a system of rights, right? So we cut to the chase. We get right immediately to the bottom line. So if you walked out of my presentation right at this point, you would know exactly what it is that I'm trying to say, right? That's all the information right there. I lead with that. I don't build a case, right? And then after the case is built, give you my sort of conclusion. I lead with that. And that's the key idea of this sort of pyramidal approach. So I begin the presentation by saying democracy should be replaced with a system of rights. And now I want to give you my arguments for why that's true. And the first argument is that democracy is a deeply flawed system which fails way too many people. And instead, what we should do is we should give everyone a set of rights which guarantees that society works well for everyone, right? And so those are my two main arguments that this idea of democracy should be replaced with a system of rights is broken down into them. And these two arguments meet the MECE's criteria. These are the two global reasons why we should replace democracy with a system of rights. And they are not, they are mutually exclusive. They don't overlap, right? They are separate ideas. And so the next step in this process is to give you the reasons for each of these arguments. And so the reason why democracy is a deeply flawed system, which fails so many people, is that first off, it's unfair, right? It rewards, it privileges the winners of a voting competition at the expense of the losers. And we can see this throughout all of society. For example, if you own a house, you're going to get tax breaks that renters do not. And so this is a social system that privileges homeowners at the expense of renters. We had that whole sort of debacle with Amazon wanting to move into Queens, and everyone objected over all of the sort of tax breaks that we were going to extend to Amazon. And so that's a good sign that people are recognizing that that's very unfair, but this happens all the time, right? Every business that moves into a city is going to negotiate certain kinds of benefits and privileges that other businesses are not going to get. I was a business owner. The mayor never called me up and worked out a deal for me, right? I'm a Mets fan. I mean, this is typical when you build a new stadium. The city will provide infrastructure, for that business. And so, they're privileging sort of baseball. Go Mets. Yes, I'm very excited about the new honor. Well, democracy aside. But look, the Wilpons got privileges, in their business that I didn't get, right? And so, there's just sort of lots and lots of examples of this. The university I was with prior to Baruch was at Columbia University. Columbia University is one of the wealthiest institutions in the world. I mean, they have over like $10 billion in assets. They're taking over almost all of Upper Manhattan, and they don't pay any taxes, right? This is a nonprofit, but that generates enormous wealth, right? Enormous riches. And, they're in a community that's struggling. Yet, despite the fact that they'll have $10 billion, they don't contribute to paying taxes, right? Which means the poorer community that they are in is picking up the tab for them. And so, you're privileging a wealthy institution like Columbia at the expense of everyone else. And so it's sort of this unfair, unequal system. It also makes change in society very, very, very difficult, right? How many votes was required for you to win the presidency, right? Tens of millions of, 50, 60, 70 million people. So if you want to change society in a democracy, right, you got to convince 70 million people to go along with your ideas. So they'll vote for the candidate that's going to implement, the changes that you want. And a lot of people think, that once you've elected your president, right, you've won. Democrats have won. They're going to introduce all of these democratic ideas. The fact is that that's just not the case, right? because in addition to winning the presidency, you also have to win Congress. You have to win the House, right? If you don't have a majority in the House, they're not going to go along with your democratic ideas. And you need a majority in the Senate, right? So you have to elect all of these people. The process of trying to change society within democracy is nearly impossible, right? So there is very few changes, right? So if you think things are unfair, if you are getting a bad deal in society, if there are systemic issues, and they're abound in a democracy, if you want to change that, there ain't much mechanisms available to you that enables you to do that. It's very, very difficult to get 70 million people to go along with what you want to do. The other thing it does is it generates conflict, right? This is not bringing people together. Democracy doesn't generate community, right? Of people who get along, people who respect each other. Just turn on the news, right? This is what democracy produces. I'm ready. A coup is a possibility. So it generates conflict. And the reason why it generates conflict, this is not like a bug. This is a feature of democracy, because essentially what democracy does is it says that there's a group of people who wins a voting contest. And whatever it is that they want to do, they are going to impose that view on all the people who lost, right? And so and what we've learned, I think, in this course is that, people sort of live in different realities, right? They have very different experiences. People are very different. And so people are going to have differences on what they think their best life is. And what your best life is going to be different from what someone else's best life is. And what democracy says is that some winner of a voting contest is going to impose their worldview, their way of life on everyone else. So it's forcing people to do things that they don't want to do. That generates conflict. That doesn't bring people together. That is not tolerance. That is not respecting diversity, right? That goes against diversity. That goes against tolerance. It undermines solidarity. Tolerance and solidarity generating community requires people to recognize that people are different, right? And they're going to live different kinds of lives. So this is the reason why democracy is a deeply flawed system, and part of the reason why it fails so many people. And so I think what we should have instead of democracy is this system of rights, which guarantees that society works very well for everyone. And some of those rights are a right to a job. There's more than enough work available to employ everyone who wants a job. And I think the government's responsibility should be to provide whatever investment money is necessary to produce enough new companies, to expand enough companies so that there are enough jobs available for everyone who wants to work for them. There's nothing within that violates any kind of economic principle that makes that idea not work. It's something we do, we just don't do enough of it, right? So you should have a right to a job, and we can have a system that provides that. You should also have a right to a fair share of income, right? We have a system now. We talked about Elon Musk last week. He's now the second richest person in the world. He's got $130 billion. That's $130 billion that other people don't have. He's taken a massive share of the income that's produced. And it's one thing to say if Elon Musk produced that $130 billion, then yes, but that's not the case, right? Elon Musk didn't produce $130 billion. He's got thousands and thousands of workers who help produce and make all of those cars. Not only that, he operates within a structure built by other people, by thousands of more people that built roads that make these cars available, right? That build the electrical lines so that he can get electricity to. There's a whole sort of division of labor, right, and collective effort, that spans millions of people in order to accomplish sort of anything, right? And so it's a collective approach. Yes, go ahead. Someone has a question.
So I just want to interject and say that that number is his net worth, which means that if he liquidated all of his assets, he would have that much money. So like all the stock he has, like then if you sold off the company, then he'd have all that money. So now all of that money is belonging to him since he owns a company. That some of that money is actually going to shareholders and all that. And
That's right, yes. Yeah,
I
no, yeah, right. You
and
bring
then
up,
without him, I feel like there wouldn't be as many jobs because he invested his money and he made some smart moves. Like he built a whole supply chain. Like the SpaceX is like it's a supply chain. There used to be a lot of third party people like middlemen, and you'd have to buy, and then it'd be priced up because the middlemen have to make money. But what he did was he took out the middleman. He started producing his own engines, finding the fuel, mining it, making all that. So he really lowered costs in that aspect. I feel like I don't know. I feel like the credit.
I think we lost you. Um, I recognize your point and I agree with it. So first off, yeah, so Elon Musk is worth $130 billion. That doesn't mean he has $130 billion in cash, but he has something pretty close to an equivalent in cash. And so this is wealth that he could eventually make use of, and he does to some extent. He funds lots of his projects and ideas, by tapping into the wealth he has. I'm not, exactly how Elon Musk spends his money, but someone like Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos, he cashes out about $1 billion a month from his wealth. So it's wealth that he has access to that he can eventually sort of consume with. And the larger point is that this is wealth that was accumulated by him and not others. Now, Elon Musk, I fully agree. He's and it plays a very important role in our economy. He adds a lot of innovation. These are people that we need in the economy. The question that I'm asking is whether we need to pay him $130 billion in order for him to do all of this kind of work. And the answer to that is no.
I'm sorry. I actually my Zoom got disconnected in the middle.
Okay.
So I didn't hear anything you said.
That's okay. Yeah. Finish your thought.
So I'm actually majoring in economics,
Okay.
and I feel like the right to work, when you said the set of rights that guarantees everyone's society a very well, like the guaranteed a job, I feel like that's not like so in capitalism, right? We're living in a capitalistic society, right? So when you have that idea that the government's producing, there's actually a lot of deadweight loss that is implicated with that. And also, since the government's producing, they're controlling the whole production side of the economy. And then we need,
Just to be clear, a right to a job doesn't mean that the government's going to provide the job. It just means that the government's going to provide the income, the money necessary for companies to be started so that jobs are available, right? I mean, they do that currently, with private companies. So I think the point that you're about to make is that there's an inefficiency if you have a government running the economy. And I agree with that. I mean, I don't know what the path is toward an efficiently run
and also I'd like to point out.
So that's not what I'm suggesting. But
Also, I'm pointing out that so Venezuela actually was doing this with their oil. They nationalized their oil, but then when OPEC came in charge and they controlled all the supply of the oil, and they were deciding how much to produce, and if you decide how much to produce, you're essentially controlling the price. So they're controlling the price. They're running a whole monopoly, and Venezuela, not being part of monopoly, they actually went bankrupt, and the government they nationalized the whole thing. So they were leveraging all this debt to make the product. But then once the price dropped, there's nothing, you can't pay off the debt if you have no price. So what they had to do was actually inflate their economy. They had to print all this money to pay off the debt. But if it was the guy in charge didn't want to default because he was a corrupt leader, he was a dictator. So their economy just had crazy inflation. So I feel like if you hedge your bet on making all these jobs and then it ends up that there's a pandemic, then all that money invested is going to go away, and then the government's going to have to file for bankruptcy, and there's a lot of problems with that. Like a lot of companies did file for bankruptcy because they have all this debt, and there's no demand. If there's no demand, you can't produce any products because no one's going to pay for it.
That's right. But so to be clear, what I'm suggesting here is that the government provide the money necessary, and that's the way our current economic system works. The government has control over the money supply through monetary policy. They also have some control over it through fiscal policy by actually
quantum
spending
easing,
sort of
quantum tightening,
tax revenues. And so all I'm saying is that they continue to sort of double down on that and do it to a degree that where you can reach full employment, which is the mandate that the Federal Reserve has. I'm just saying, they have to sort of live up to that mandate. I'm not at all suggesting that the government should just start printing money and building its own companies and starting monopolies and paying people to produce things that nobody wants. What I'm saying is that some of this money, I think, should be used to start worker cooperatives, which are market-based organizations like private companies. The only difference is that the workers are equal owners of these types of companies. And these companies, the economic literature is very clear on this. They perform better than private companies because the incentives are better aligned when all of the owners have a say over how the organization is run and have an ownership stake in it. And so all I'm suggesting is that the government, and they do this already, they just need to do a better job at it, is making sure that there's enough money in the economic system so that there are enough jobs provided so that jobs can be provided to everyone. That means you need to provide enough investment money to start enough companies to employ everyone, to get a fair share. I think this is part of the principle of worker cooperatives. I think workers should have the opportunity to choose whether they want to work at a private company or a worker cooperative. And at a worker cooperative, productivity will be roughly around $70 an hour. They minimize inequality to only keeping differences in income to what's necessary for it to be an effective incentive. It's something like 4-to-1. All that means is that people paid at worker cooperatives are paid on average about $70 an hour, and everyone makes roughly close to that. When you're guaranteed a job that pays you roughly $70 an hour, that solves lots of the problems that exist in society. And finally, you should have a right to live how you want, so long as you don't violate that same right in others. And so this is really, it's less an argument for this idea and more of an illustration of the pyramid approach. And so hopefully I made clear how this pyramid approach would work, even when you're presenting a controversial and emotionally sort of charged idea like this. And the basic idea, and I'll just go back to that sort of graphic to illustrate it right here. You want to start with your main conclusion, right? Your main conclusion is we need to, expand into this European market, or we need to offer this new product line, or in my example, we need to replace democracy with a system of rights. So you start with your sort of bottom line, then you add the supporting arguments. In my case, the supporting arguments were that democracy is deeply flawed, that fails a lot of people, a system of rights would guarantee that society works well for everyone. Those arguments need to meet that MECE's principle. They need to be mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. And just to give you an idea of how that might not be the case, right? And so if you look at the one argument that I presented, the first one, democracy is a deeply flawed system which fails too many people, and I gave sort of 3 reasons why that's true. These 3 reasons also need to meet that MECE's principle, right? They need to be mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. Originally, this idea was presented as it's unfair and it's unequal. And of course, inequality is an example of being unfair. So if I use those 2 categories, they would fail to meet that mutual exclusivity criteria. So these 3 do. And we'll wrap it up here. I think we're running a little bit late. So yeah, we're actually right at the 5:25 mark. So actually perfect timing. So does anyone have any questions about any of this?
Wait, so your bullet points would be the supporting data, or?
So the bullet points, right? So the bullet points would be, to go back to the example, this illustration. So they would be the supporting data / insights / conclusions, right? So they would be the 3 boxes on the bottom of this pyramid. And the basic idea is that you want to present that last. You want to present that at the end. You want to start sort of with your main recommendation, your goal, or your main idea, and then build up the foundation underneath it after, which is typically the reverse of the process that people usually use.
It's kind of like an essay.
Exactly, yeah. And so, right, it's very similar to an essay, and a lot of this was borrowed from the Socratic method. And so, right, so this has a sort of a deep history. This specific version of it that introduces sort of the MECE concept, I think is the thing that makes it unique that consultants use. The details of that you can find in a book if this is something that you find appealing. But the pyramidal approach, right, which follows sort of a persuasive essay, is certainly a way that you can, a way that you should approach all of your business forms of communication.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. You too. Yeah, we'll end here. And of course, I will stick around if anyone else has any further questions. And of course, you can always email me. Thank you. And next week is our final lecture. We will wrap it all up next week. And so I look forward to seeing you all then. And have a great week in the meantime.
Thank you, Professor. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Professor. Have a good one.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Professor,
Yeah.
for
I will
listening to
convert
my
you.
argument and all that.
I will convert you to a socialist. Now go ahead.
I don't know. I feel like capitalism does have its flaws, but the reason why Elon Musk or other billionaires are so rich is because the market likes what they produce. And
So
that's what
yeah.
I think. Because if the market didn't like what they produce, they wouldn't be rich. And if they didn't like what they invest or made, then they would have no money. The market wouldn't buy it.
Yeah,
So that's what I think.
I agree with that. I think the market, I think, is a very effective mechanism. And I'm not at all suggesting that we do away with the market. The people who dictate what gets produced and at what price should be consumers, right? And they should have the freedom and power to decide what gets produced by how they spend their money. The thing that I am questioning is how much of that income that's produced should a guy like Elon take? And the market really doesn't have much of a say in that. It's certainly not consumers that are having a say in it. When you buy a Tesla car, what goes into your decision-making process is not whether the income generated in the sale is allocated fairly among all the participants in the Tesla organization or the economic system, right? So it doesn't play a role in, and so I think that there are mechanisms in place that determine how much, what percentage of the income generated you get that I think are unfair mechanisms. And so, like in the case of like Elon Musk, or anyone that gets this enormous share, it depends on things like how close you are to revenue production, right? And so people who are closer to revenue production have greater bargaining power to take a larger share than people who are further away from revenue production. So people on the front lines, so people like in sales, let's say, will typically make more money than people in the back office. And it's not because that they're more productive, right? They're more valuable, or because the market demands that they get paid more. It's just their unique position within sort of the economic system grants them this power to take more of the revenue that's generated than other people. And I would say that that mechanism is not exactly fair. And I don't at all advocate that we should replace that system with this alternative. I'm just saying we should give people the choice, and they should freely choose whether they want to work in a cooperative where they get paid close to $70 an hour, or try their luck at a private company where income is allocated in that way. That would be sort of the ideal for me.
All right, yeah. Thank you for listening to my thoughts, though.
Yeah, thank you for contributing. I think they're interesting ideas. They're important ideas that need to be considered. So thank you for it.
But I also, one thing I want to add to your response is that if the, let's say that the resource, or I mean, let's say the income was allocated, or the revenue was or the profits were allocated evenly, then the person that made the whole business, then there's no point of him starting it. Because he's risking all this capital, this startup capital, and then he's just going to get 10% of, let's say there's like 100 workers that he ends up hiring, or 99 workers that ends up hiring. That means a total of 100, including himself. Then he's going to get 100th of what's profitable. And I feel like that risk isn't even worth starting. And now using that logic, that's not even starting, then there would be no business to start with. Like no one would ever want to make a business because it's not even a profitable investment. So
you're 100% right. You are 100% right.
Of course, everything has their flaws. There's gives and takes. So, not saying capitalism is like working, or it has its flaws. Yeah, but I don't know. I feel like everything has its flaws.
Yeah,
that's it.
I agree. There's probably no perfect system out there. But you're correct. This worker cooperative idea would not work at all if it relied on the private investment of entrepreneurs, because they're going to require return on their investment. And if everyone's an equal owner, right, they're not going to get that return. And so there will be no investment made, other than some sort of charitable effort by an entrepreneur. So that you're right, that wouldn't work. And so people who advocate this idea, that's not the system that they advocate for.
I was listening to a podcast, and this economist actually talks, right? So like I think I'm very well versed in that area. And there's this one person, I think she's in the Senate, and she made a book about looting, how it's good. And she said that if this looting shows, this is what she said, like paraphrase, she said that when people loot, it's a way to show that they don't need a job and they get what they need, and everyone should be looting because it shows you that you don't need money. But then, like, if everyone had the ideology of stealing is good, then nothing would be produced. And it's just like it's kind of like, I don't know, ridiculous to even like think that without even seeing the farther consequence of that. So a senator said that. She was